night of October 21st, 1904, the Imperial Russian Navy made a mistake so grave that it nearly landed them at war with the United Kingdom. It was the height of the Russo-Japanese War, and the Russian Baltic Fleet was sailing through a part of the North Sea called Dogger Bank when it spotted several British trawlers that it mistook for the Japanese torpedo boats. The Russians opened fire on both the civilian vessels and, somehow, themselves, with dire consequences. The incident caused an international outcry, particularly in Britain, and led to a diplomatic crisis between Russia and the United Kingdom. It became known as the Dogger Bank Incident, but has also been called the North Sea Incident. The Russian outrage, the UK press was merciless, and the more understated Incident of Hull. Under the command of Admiral Zinovy Rozhestvensky, the Russian Baltic Fleet was sailing the North Sea whilst heading to the Far East, where it was to reinforce the Pacific Squadron stationed at Port Arthur in China. The fleet was made up of numerous warships, including battleships, cruisers, and destroyers, all of which were on high alert. The fleet believed it had already spotted Japanese cruisers in the region the day before, as well as balloons, and the admiral had called for his men to keep their eyes peeled. As the fleet approached Dogger Bank, a well-known fishing area, the night was dark and foggy, leading to terrible visibility. At around midnight, a Russian lookout reported seeing small vessels nearby. The already spooked and inexperienced Russian crews jumped to conclusions and began to prepare for an imminent attack. The warships illuminated the trawlers with their powerful searchlights, but didn't take the time to verify their targets. On Admiral Rozhestvensky's order, they opened fire and unleashed a barrage of gunfire and shells on the defenseless British fishing trawlers from Hull. Tragically, the trawlers had been mid-haul and had their nets down, meaning they couldn't even attempt to flee. He Crane, a British trawler, was sunk with its captain and boatswain losing their lives. At least 4 other trawlers, including the Minnow, Mulmain, and Snipe, were damaged, and 6 fishermen were hurt. Sadly, one was mortally wounded and died several months later from his injuries. In a bizarre turn of events, the Russian fleet didn't even escape unscathed, somehow managing to shoot itself in the foot. In the chaos, the Russians fired upon their cruiser, the Aurora. 1 sailor and a Russian Orthodox priest were killed. The Russians later tried to hide this embarrassing aspect of the incident, but it was revealed after wireless messages were interpreted by the British Felixstowe station. The whole sorry incident lasted for about 20 minutes, with the Russians firing sporadically throughout. Eventually, it seems, they realized the enemy wasn't firing back, and the admiral called a ceasefire. It was only then the sailors took in their catastrophic mistake. The Russian fleet, shaken and embarrassed, skulked away without trying to help the survivors, unaware of the international uproar that would soon follow. Suffice it to say, the Dogger Bank incident was a mistake of epic proportions. But how exactly did an entire Russian fleet end up firing on a group of defenseless fishermen? Was it all down to ineptitude? Well, at the heart of the error lay heightened paranoia and a lack of proper naval training. Firstly, the Russian Baltic Fleet was on high alert, plagued by fears of encountering Japanese forces. The Russo-Japanese War had already seen significant losses for Russia, contributing to a sense of desperation and hypervigilance. This anxiety was exacerbated by rumors and false reports of Japanese ships lurking in European waters. Russian intelligence had warned the fleet that enemy intelligence was active in the region. The Russians were particularly concerned about torpedo boats, a technology all the major navies had recently developed. These small ships had the potential to damage and sink warships much larger than them and were incredibly difficult to spot. The constant fear of torpedo boat attacks had left its mark on the Russian Navy's sailors and commanders. Not long before the incident, Admiral Rozhestvensky had been warned that Japanese torpedo boats had been spotted in the region. According to the report, the ships only showed lights on the mizzen masthead so that, at a distance, they might be taken for fishing boats. The admiral took this report at face value and ordered his ships to speed through the area. The admiral wasn't alone in his paranoia. The Dogger Bank incident wasn't the first time Russian ships had fired on innocent fishermen. The Russian fleet had already fired on fishermen, carrying consular dispatches to them near the Danish coast. Supposedly, the only reason those fishermen had survived was because the Russian fleet could barely shoot straight.